The Man in Lower 10, Mary Roberts Rinehart. Chapter 3. Across the aisle. No solution offering itself, I went back to my berth. The snorer across had apparently strangled or turned over, and so after a time I dropped asleep, to be awakened by the morning sunlight across my face. I felt for my watch, yawning prodigiously. I reached under the pillow and failed to find it, but something scratched the back of my hand. I sat up irritably and nursed the wound, which was bleeding a little. Still drowsy, I felt more cautiously for what I supposed had been my scarf pin, but there was nothing there. Wide awake now, I reached for my traveling bag, on the chance that I had put my watch in there. I had drawn the satchel to me and had my hand on the lock before I realized that it was not my own. Mine was of alligator hide. I had killed the beast in Florida after the expenditure of enough money to have bought a house and enough energy to have built one. The bag I held in my hand was a black one, sealskin, I think. The staggering thought of what the loss of my bag meant to me put my finger on the bell and kept it there until the porter came. "Did you ring, sir?" he asked, poking his head through the curtains obsequiously. McKnight objects that nobody can poke his head through a curtain and be obsequious, but Pullman porters can and do. "No!" I snapped. "It rang itself. What in thunder do you mean by exchanging my valise for this one? You'll have to find it if you waken the entire car to do it. There are important papers in that grip." "Porter," called a feminine voice from an upper berth nearby. "Porter, am I to dangle here all day?" "Let her dangle," I said savagely. "You find that bag of mine." The porter frowned. Then he looked at me with injured dignity. "I brought in your overcoat, sir. You carried your own valise." The fellow was right. In an excess of caution, I had refused to relinquish my alligator bag and had turned over my other traps to the porter. It was clear enough then. I was simply a victim of the usual sleeping car robbery. I was in a lather of perspiration by that time. The lady down the car was still dangling and talking about it. Still nearer, a feminine voice was giving quick orders in French, presumably to a maid. The porter was on his knees, looking under the berth. "Not there, sir," he said, dusting his knees. He was visibly more cheerful, having been absolved of responsibility. "Reckon it was taken while you was wandering around the car last night." "I'll give you $50 if you find it," I said. $100. "Reach up my shoes and I'll—" I stopped abruptly. My eyes were fixed in stupefied amazement on a coat that hung from a hook at the foot of my berth. From the coat they traveled, dazed, to the soft-bosomed shirt beside it, and from there to the collar and cravat in the net hammock across the windows. $100, the porter repeated, showing his teeth. But I caught him by the arm and pointed to the foot of the berth. What color's that coat?" I asked unsteadily. "Gray, sir." His tone was one of gentle reproof. "And the trousers?" He reached over and held up one creased leg. "Gray, too," he grinned. "Gray!" I could not believe even his corroboration of my own eyes. "But my clothes were blue." The porter was amused. He dived under the curtains and brought up a pair of shoes. "Your shoes, sir," he said with a flourish. "Reckon you've been dreaming, sir." Now, there are two things I always avoid in my dress, possibly an idiosyncrasy of my bachelor existence. These tabooed articles are red neckties and tan shoes. And not only were the shoes the porter lifted from the floor of a gorgeous shade of yellow, but the scarf, which was run through the turned-over collar, was a gaudy red. It took a full minute for the real import of things to penetrate my dazed intelligence. Then I gave a vindictive kick at the offending ensemble. "They're not mine, any of them," I snarled. "They are some other fellow's. I'll sit here until I take root before I put them on." "They're nice-looking clothes," the porter put in, eyeing the red tie with appreciation. "Ain't everybody would have left you anything." "Call the conductor," I said shortly. Then a possible explanation occurred to me. "Oh, porter, what's the number of this berth?" "7, sir, if you can't wear those shoes." "7!" In my relief, I almost shouted it. "Why, then it's simple enough. I'm in the wrong berth, that's all. My berth is 9. Only, where the deuce is the man who belongs here?" "Likely in 9, sir." The darky was enjoying himself. "You and the other gentleman just got mixed in the night." "That's all, sir." It was clear that he thought I had been drinking. I drew a long breath. Of course, that was the explanation. This was number 7's berth. That was his soft hat. This his umbrella, his coat, his bag. My rage turned to irritation at myself. The porter went to the next berth, and I could hear his softly insinuating voice. "Time to get up, sir." "Are you awake?" "Time to get up." There was no response from number 9. I guessed that he had opened the curtains and was looking in. Then he came back. "Number 9's empty," he said. "Empty? Do you mean my clothes aren't there?" I demanded. "My valise? Why don't you answer me?" "You don't give me time," he retorted. "There ain't nothing there, but it's been slept in." The disappointment was the greater for my few moments of hope. I sat up in a white fury and put on the clothes that had been left me. Then, still raging, I sat on the edge of the berth and put on the obnoxious tan shoes. The porter, called to his duties, made little excursions back to me to offer assistance and to chuckle at my discomfiture. He stood by, outwardly decorous, but with little irritating grins of amusement around his mouth when I finally emerged with the red tie in my hand. "Bet the owner of those clothes didn't become them any more than you do," he said, as he plied the ubiquitous whisk broom. "When I get the owner of these clothes," I retorted grimly, "he will need a shroud. Where's the conductor?" The conductor was coming, he assured me, also that there was no bag answering the description of mine on the car. I slammed my way to the dressing room, washed, choked my 15.5 neck into a 15 collar, and was back again in less than 5 minutes. The car, as well as its occupants, was gradually taking on a daylight appearance. I hobbled in, for one of the shoes was abominably tight, and found myself facing a young woman in blue with an unforgettable face. "3 women already?" McKnight says. "That's going some, even if you don't count the Gilmore nurse." She stood, half-turned toward me, one hand idly drooping, the other steadying her as she gazed out at the flying landscape. I had an instant impression that I had met her somewhere, under different circumstances, more cheerful ones, I thought, for the girl's dejection now was evident. Beside her, sitting down, a small dark woman, considerably older, was talking in a rapid undertone. The girl nodded indifferently now and then. I fancied, although I was not sure, that my appearance brought a startled look into the young woman's face. I sat down, and hands thrust deep into the other man's pockets, stared ruefully at the other man's shoes. The stage was set. In a moment, the curtain was going up on the first act of the play. And for a while, we would all say our little speeches and sing our little songs, and I, the villain, would hold center stage while the gallery hissed. The porter was standing beside lower 10. He had reached in and was knocking valiantly, but his efforts met with no response. He winked at me over his shoulder. Then he unfastened the curtains and bent forward. Behind him I saw him stiffen, heard his muttered exclamation, saw the bluish pallor that spread over his face and neck. As he retreated a step, the interior of lower 10 lay open to the day. The man in it was on his back, the early morning sun striking full on his upturned face. But the light did not disturb him. A small stain of red dyed the front of his nightclothes and trailed across the sheet. His half-open eyes were fixed, without seeing, on the shining wood above. I grasped the porter's shaking shoulders and stared down to where the train imparted to the body a grisly suggestion of motion. Good Lord, I gasped. The man's been murdered.